Well, absolutely. Thank you so much, Alexis, and well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for joining us for the latest installment of the Institute of the Americas 2014 Energy Webinar Series. And as we get started, I want to make sure we thank and acknowledge our sponsors of the 2014 Energy Webinar Series, Intercap Energy Systems and Bates White. And then a special acknowledgement of today's co-host sponsor, GDF Suez Energía de Mexico. Thank you very much for all those company support so that we can continue to bring these webinars to you throughout the course of the year. Well, I want to quickly run through this and then have Francisco make his remarks. We're all very eager to hear from him. It goes without saying that just over a week ago, the Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto signed into law the latest legislation on the path to Mexico's historic energy reform. There were 9 new laws and amendments to 12 existing laws that were promulgated by the president just over a week ago. And these indeed were the latest steps on the road to a massive undertaking that formally began last December with the amendments to the Mexican Constitution. And without a doubt, there are several elements of this overhaul of Mexico's energy sector that we're all following, but I think it's fair to say that some of the most profound are those aimed at the regulatory environment, and both in terms of what the reform means for existing regulatory bodies, such as the CRE that Francisco runs as chairman, but also the creation of several new entities that will have specific oversight roles across various segments of the energy sector in Mexico. So a huge change to the landscape, and that's why we called today's webinar presentation, we use the terminology regulatory landscape. And indeed, we're delighted to have Francisco Javier Salazar, the chairman of the Comisión Reguladora de Energía in Mexico, as our featured presenter for today's webinar. And Francisco will, his presentation will help us to demystify and better understand this new regulatory landscape in Mexico, and particularly as it relates to his entity, the CRE. Francisco was appointed chairman of the CRE in 2005 and then reappointed for a second 5-year term in 2010. He was also elected president of the Ibero-American Energy Regulators Association in March 2012. That's a 3-year term. He holds degrees from the London School of Economics and the Autonomous University of San Luis Potosí. And when I first met Francisco, he was representing his home state of San Luis Potosí in the Mexican Chamber of Deputies, where he served as chairman of the Energy Committee in the Chamber of Deputies. And Francisco, as probably everyone online knows, he has been working and involved with these issues for many years in Mexico and has been one of the most dedicated and tireless advocates of energy reform in Mexico. And I hope you won't mind me saying this, but I think his fingerprints are literally all over the legislation that was signed into law just a few days ago. And I'll end my introduction by returning to the comment of where Francisco comes from, San Luis Potosí, which I have to note here before I turn it over to Francisco, was indeed the state in Mexico during last December's constitutional amendment reform process. It was the state of Mexico, San Luis Potosí, that formalized and gave the final state approval of the constitutional amendment and reform. And so I think it was quite the brocha de oro of the Mexican constitutional reform last December that Francisco Salazar's home state put the amendment over the line, as it were. So without any further ado, I'll invite our good friend Francisco Javier Salazar to help us demystify the new regulatory environment in Mexico. Francisco, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. I'm really delighted to be here today with you. Good afternoon to everyone. And it's really a pleasure to be part of this 2014 Energy Webinar Series, where I would like to explain a little bit more in detail what will be the role of the CRE after this energy reform was passed in its second stage by the Congress. So without further ado, let me just start by describing what were the principles that guided the discussion in the Congress. Well, the first of all was competition. As all of you know, Mexico had a vertically integrated system, both in the hydrocarbons and the electric sector. So it was very important to introduce competition, to have a different industrial organization model that would allow for other actors with resources and that would bring benefits to the consumers by competing for the market and in the market. So that was the first guiding principle of the reform. The second principle was the state had to be strengthened. Of course, whenever you rely on the market, you're doing the right thing, but the market normally fails, and there are some activities that cannot operate under a competition scheme. We have natural monopolies both in the electric sector and in the hydrocarbon sector. So it was very important to strengthen the state, and this had to be done in its three roles. First of all, as a policy maker, as the planner of the energy sector, also as the regulator, and finally, since the state decided that it was going to keep its state enterprises, these state firms had to be strengthened. The third principle, of course, is sustainability. It is impossible to think in an energy sector that is not sustainable. We need to have a sector that it's cleaner every day, and we have to have regulation that achieves this goal. The fourth principle was transparency. As all of you know, in the past, the energy sector has been accused of not being very transparent. So transparency was a very big issue during the discussion. Transparency has been included as one of the most important principles in all the decisions that the state will be taking, in all of the auctions, the bids for the oil blocks or the gas blocks, or for all the permits, for all the decisions taken within the state enterprises. The fifth principle was Mexico was not changing the discussion about who is the owner of the underground resources. That was always the principle. The oil and the gas that remain in the underground are owned by the nation, by the state, and of course, once they are extracted, they can be sold. They can be used as a form of payment to the companies extracting that. And finally, one thing that was very important was how to manage the revenues with an internet generational view. How can we benefit not only this generation, but the coming generations? So those were the 6 principles that guided the discussion. First, to amend the Constitution, and second, to deliver what we call the secondary laws. And these principles will continue to be what we will use to issue, for instance, the bylaws, which will be the third stage of this energy reform, and the regulatory instruments, which will be the fourth stage of the reform. So after describing that, it is important to understand where we were and where we are now. And in the oil and liquids market, as you can see, we had a market structure that, as I mentioned before, was basically an integrated, vertically integrated monopoly, where Pemex was doing almost everything through its subsidiaries. For instance, Pemex Exploración y Producción, Pemex was extracting, was exploring, was producing oil and gas. In 2008, there was a small reform that allowed for some kind of improved service contracts, what were called the incentivized contracts, but these kind of contracts didn't give any kind of, or didn't work very well, in the sense that they did not achieve what was looked for. And in the rest of the chain, we have Pemex as the basic supplier of products. So for instance, it was the sole refiner. It was the owner of the largest storage facilities. It was the owner of the pipelines, and it was also the marketer or the seller of most products in the hydrocarbons sector. Of course, we had jobbers selling gasoline. We had some private companies selling its services to Pemex, but the basic model was one in which Pemex was the monopoly. So this was changed, and right now we have a model where the private sector is allowed all through the chain. To start with, in exploration and production, we do not only have now the service contracts, we have other kind of contracts. We have the production sharing agreements, we have the profit sharing agreements, we have the licenses, and so these kind of contracts will allow the private sector to participate in these activities. But not only that, in the rest of the activities, for instance, in refining, the private sector will be allowed to construct refineries. They will be allowed to build petrochemical plants related to these refined products, and of course, they will be allowed to build storage facilities, transportation, pipelines for transportation of products, and they will be allowed to own service stations, and they will be able to sell the products that are produced in the hydrocarbon sector. Now, if we turn to the natural gas sector, what we will see is that this was one sector that was partially opened in the mid-90s. In the mid-90s, the downstream activities were opened. So we had the private sector coming and building some pipelines. They were allowed to participate as LDCs to distribute natural gas in some cities, and they were allowed to sell the gas. Now, the problem is that even with that partial opening, we had a virtual, no, a de facto monopoly, in the sense that Pemex was the main transporting company. So we didn't have a lot of private investment coming, because there was not enough competition in the market or for the market. So this was changed, and now, as a result of the reform, of course, again, we have the private sector allowed to explore and produce natural gas and all the liquids that come with the gas. They will be allowed to install gas processing plants. They will be able to build them. For instance, if the private sector starts to develop the shale plays or other kinds of unconventional gas, and that gas comes with liquids or with other products, that they will be able to process that gas. Of course, the rest of the chain was open, so it remains open. But one very important thing is that we will have an independent system operator. Pemex will be giving all their pipelines to this independent system operator, which is the Senagas, and the Senagas will be owning those pipelines, and it will be also operating those pipelines, along with private pipelines that are interested to be interconnected with that system. And the rest of the chain, as I mentioned before, remains open. Now, talking about the electricity sector, this was another sector that had some partial opening back in the 90s. The private sector was allowed to generate electricity for their own consumption, or to sell that electricity to CFE under what we call an IPP scheme, which is not a truly IPP scheme in the way you know it in other countries. But the important thing is that the private sector was allowed. But so we had some kind of competition for the market, for the expansion market, for the expansion of CFE's generation, but we didn't have a competition in the market. And in the rest of the chain, we had CFE as the system operator. We had CFE as the owner of transmission and distribution lines. Of course, they were able to sign some EPC contracts to build the lines, but that was it. And in the case of marketing, we didn't have strictly this kind of activity. What we have is this IPP selling electricity to CFE, or we have the self-consumption agreement schemes where the generating companies were delivering that electricity to the partners of that self-supply scheme. So in a similar way to what happened in the hydrocarbon sector, there was a radical opening of this sector. So the new market structure is one where we have competition not only for the market, but in the market. In the case of generation, the generators will be able to sell their electricity directly to the qualified users. They will be able to sell in a spot market. They will be able to sign bilateral contracts. The second thing that is very important is SENACE, which was the system operator, is now totally independent. It is not any longer, or will not longer be part of CFE. It will be a truly independent system operator. Transmission and distribution will still be handled by the state. But what is interesting is that the private sector will be allowed to participate as the operators of transmission lines whenever there are expansions. And for instance, in the case of distribution, what we will have is, first of all, the distribution will be horizontally splitted, and after and also whenever CFE fails to deliver some economic indicators that will be set by the Treasury Department, by the Secretaría de Hacienda, the private sector will be allowed to operate those systems after there is some kind of competitive mechanism that will be instrumented by the ministry. And finally, of course, we'll have a competition in the marketing sector. There will be qualified users that will be allowed to buy their electricity directly in the market. And these qualified users will be increasing as time passes by. In the very beginning, you will require to have a demand of more than 3 megawatts, but 1 year after, that threshold will be reduced to 2 megawatts, and after that, in 2 years, to 1 megawatt. And the Secretary of Energy will be reducing that, has the obligation to be reducing the threshold to be qualified as an eligible user. And of course, the users that are not qualified as eligible users will be regulated, and will be regulating that. So once that I have described this industrial organization that we'll have in the sector, let me describe what was the institutional arrangement we had before the reform, and what will be the new institutional arrangement. In the past, it was very simple because as I mentioned before, we had a very closed sector. So the only thing we had is the two very important secretaries in the sector, the Treasury Department, the Secretaría de Hacienda, and the Energy Ministry, the Secretaría de Energía. So these two secretaries were the main players as policymakers. And there were two regulators, two independent regulators that were part of the ministry. Our institution, the Energy Regulatory Commission, the CRE, and the National Hydrocarbons Commission, which is the upstream regulator, and that was born, and which was born in 2008. CRE was born back in 1994. And after also we had the two state firms, the paraestatales, Pemex and CFE, which were the largest operators in the sector. As you can see in this slide, what we have is a very different and very complex institutional arrangement, where we have a lot of institutions playing different roles in the sector. First of all, we have the Mexican Oil Fund. It is a trust that will be part of the Bank of Mexico, the central bank. This oil fund will be in charge of managing the resources that will be paid by the companies extracting the resources. And it's going to be an independent trust, again, that will be, from an administrative point of view, part of the central bank. Then on the executive branch, we'll have first the secretaries. Again, we have the Treasury Department, the Secretaría de Hacienda, we have the Energy Ministry. But And now the Environmental Ministry, the Semarnat, the Secretaría de Medio Ambiente, they will play a very important role. And to start with, they will have a regulatory agency called the National Agency for Safety and Environmental Protection in the Hydrocarbon Sector. This will be a new regulator that will be part of the Semarnat. They will be in charge of safety and environmental protection, as I mentioned, in the hydrocarbon sector. Their legal nature will be the legal nature we had before the reform. Then we have two decentralized entities, which will be the SENACE, the independent system operator of the electricity sector, and we will have Senagas, which will be a Transco, the independent system operator, and the operator of former Pemex pipelines. And then we'll have what we call the state-owned productive companies, Pemex and its affiliates, and CFE and its affiliates. And finally, the two previous existing regulators, CRE and CNH, are transformed in what it's called at the constitutional level, coordinated independent regulators. What does that mean? Well, it basically means that we are going to be ministerial non-governmental agencies. And let me just skip this and describe what we will be. Basically, instead of being part of a ministry, we will still be part of the executive branch, but will be at the same level than the ministries. So our legal nature is strengthened. As you can see in a chart that I will be showing next, if you evaluate or assess what is the strength of the new regulators, you will see that we are, from a formal point of view, we're becoming very strong. These coordinated regulatory agencies will be composed with 7 commissioners. Right now, it's 5 of us. In the next month, the Senate will be appointing 2 more commissioners based on the proposal by the president. These regulatory agencies ourselves will have to broadcast and our sessions. We will start doing that, for instance, tomorrow. And the execution of our mandates will be under a very strict code of conduct and, of course, promoting transparency. And it's interesting to say that as time has passed, the legal nature of the regulators has evolved, and we started being created by presidential decrees in 1995 when CRE was created. We were just a ministerial agency, but we didn't have a lot of autonomy. It was only technical autonomy. In 1995, when the CRE law was enacted by Congress, besides the technical autonomy, we received operational autonomy, but we were still part of the ministry. In 2008, more autonomy was given to us. We received administrative autonomy, and nowadays we'll have also financial autonomy. This is very important because whenever you talk about an independent agency, if it doesn't have enough resources to face the players that are acting in the sector that it's regulated, you do not really have an independent regulator. So this was the final thing that was given to the regulators, and again, we became part of the executive branch, but without being part of the ministry. So just to finish this, let me just show you this chart. If we measure the institutional improvement of CRE using what it's called the Gilardis index, what you will see is that the institutional arrangement improved our CRE, our agency. So we are a very strong institution right now. So let me just now go back to the description of the sector, and let me start describing what will be the powers that we will have. In the oil and liquid sector, basically, we will be regulating both the downstream and midstream activities. We will be in charge of guaranteeing an open access to the systems, to the storage and transportation system. Whenever it's decided that it's convenient from an economic point of view, we'll be setting the rates. In the case of liquids, we will decide if market rates or contract rates are allowed. That could happen, but that will be based on the conditions of the developer. For instance, at the very beginning, we think that that shouldn't be the case with the incumbent, with the Pemex, but this is part of what will be discussed during the construction of the bylaws and the regulatory instruments. And in the case of marketing, as you probably know, in the secondary legislation, it was said that there will be a transition period during which we'll be regulating the price of Pemex. So Pemex will be regulating during the next couple of years, as long as if we see that there is more competition, if imports start to become important, we will get rid of regulation. So, and we will allow the market to set the prices. And it's interesting because the hydrocarbons law gave us a lot of powers that are typical from a competition authority. Like, for instance, we'll be in charge of the oversight of the market. We'll be overseeing the market. We will also be able to authorize or limit the cross ownership between different activities. If there is a problem in the market, we'll be able to limit the market share. We will also have the power, in case there is a problem with competition, to divest integrated activities, to order the divestiture of integrated activities. And the Congress also decided that we would be in charge of permitting the service stations. This is not going to be regulated from an economic point of view. The only thing that we'll be regulating here is we will grant the permits, and we will be regulating the quality and the amount of product being delivered to the consumers. Now, in the case of gas, as you know, since 2005, we were in charge of granting the permits for transport and distribution, for storage. We were in charge of third-party access. We were in charge of setting the tariffs, the general conditions of service, and the rates. And we were also in charge of regulating what is called the first-hand sales price, which is the Pemex price as an incumbent. So that will continue to be part of what we will be doing. But what is important now is that, again, as I mentioned before, we will have powers that are typical from a competition authority in order to bring more competition in the system. As I mentioned before, the basic problem we have in the gas sector is that the opening of the sector was not complete. It was Pemex was de facto monopoly in the sector, so we'll be able to in case of a necessity, we'll be able to have powers to introduce more competition. And the rest of the powers that we'll have is we'll be in charge of authorizing the operators of the grid. We will be able to comment on grid expansion. We'll be authorizing the bidding rules for expansions of the integrated systems. We'll approve integrated systems, and same as in the past, we'll be bidding new distribution zones for LDCs. And finally, in the case of electricity, as I mentioned before, this was a sector where we already have some powers. We were in charge of granting the permits. We will continue doing that. We will give authorizations for imports. Imports will be playing a very important role during the initial stage of the market. we believe that there is a capacity and electricity available in the U.S. that could compete in the Mexican market, so we'll be authorizing that. We'll be in charge of approving the market rules, and the first rules will be issued under a public consultation procedure, will be issued by the ministry, but after that, we'll be in charge of that process. In the case of transmission and distribution, we'll be regulating the third-party access, the tariff, the general conditions of service, the rates. And in the case of marketing, we'll be issuing the permits for suppliers, and we'll be also regulating the rates of those users that will be regulated. Of course, the eligible users will not, the energy for the eligible users will not be regulated. That the price of that electricity will be set by the market. And other powers that we'll have in the electricity sector is we'll be in charge of regulating the smart grids and distributed generation. We will also be in charge of regulating clean energy. And it's interesting because under the electricity sector law, under this Electricity Act, the definition of clean energy is very broad, and it does not only include renewable, typical renewable energy, but also includes, for instance, efficient cogeneration. It will include generation coming out of hydrogen. Will also include, for instance, the large hydros, which are not typically considered as clean, as renewables, will be considered as clean energy. Also, the production of energy by biomass, with biomass, even or with biogas coming out of municipal residuals will be considered as clean energy. So there is a very broad definition of what is clean energy. So we have an interesting menu of energy options that will be competitive. We'll be in charge of registering the eligible users and marketeers, the suppliers of the market. We'll be in charge of overseeing the market. We'll probably hire someone, a very specialized monitor, but the ones in charge of sanctioning manipulation of a market will be ourselves. We'll be also authorizing the auctions for not only for renewables, but also for the electricity that will be used to supply the regulated users. Because one of the important principles embedded in the law is that we'll have competition for the market in the case of the regulated users. We will also set the requirements for supply, and this is related with capacity markets. We will also regulate the supply of last resource. We'll, on a similar way to what happens in the hydrocarbons, we'll comment on grid expansion, the planning of the grid expansion. We'll be issuing the interconnection contract models, and we'll be regulating the quality and the reliability of the sector. So that is basically, in a nutshell, what will be our powers under the energy reform. Let me just finish by describing what are the opportunities that we'll have in the short term. This is a chart that shows that in terms of infrastructure for oil products, we have less than 5 days of storage for oil or diesel. So we need massive amounts of investment in this sector. So there are a lot of opportunities in the sector. So we want to issue regulation as soon as possible to allow investment to come in this sector. We want to increase these storage days to at least in the beginning 10 to 15 days, and in the future to more than that. The strategic stocks is very important for us. One of the main objectives of the reform was to have security of supply. So this is something where a lot of investment will be needed in the short run. And finally, in the electricity sector, there's also a need to to have a lot of investments. CFE has been announcing a lot of projects, but that's only a small part of what will be needed. And furthermore, if the demand that grows as the result of the energy reform, these forecasts of capacity will have to grow. So there are a lot of opportunities in the electricity sector. A lot of capacity will have to be built in the coming years. So again, we want our regulation to be something that attracts investors. In the past, we have been able to bring investments up to $47 billion in the electricity sector as a result of the regulation that we have issued. We are confident that we'll continue issuing regulation that will attract investors, and this is just because Mexico is growing, or we need a lot of electricity coming in line, and regulation is a very important part of this. So with this, I finished my presentation, and I'm open to your questions or comments. Thank you very much.
Okay, sincere apologies for that. I don't know what happened. Both of our mics went out on us over here, and of course we have received many questions. Thank you. That was a absolutely wonderful presentation, extremely succinct, to the point, and very informative, in underscoring the amount of change and just the incredible undertaking that the government and all kinds of institutions in Mexico are going through. Francisco, if you don't mind, we're just going to jump right into the questions. I'm going to try and I don't know if we'll be able to put too much order to these, but I'll throw several. We have several here that I want to try and get into. I think some will be more relevant to your specific mandate at CRE, some less so. Hopefully, you can still help us through some of the ones that are more on the oil and gas side. Let me try to pull up the first question here, and we'll follow the. There's a question about. I'm sorry, we're having a little. Let me get this out here. There's a question about the green energy certificate, and I think you did talk a little bit about clean energy. But Francisco, how quickly will CRE be able to react to new responsibilities? And there's mention here of some specific things.
Okay, well, there is the electricity law establishes some kind of schedule for the different regulatory instruments. Besides that, as you probably know, the President, Enrique Peña Nieto, announced last week some measures that are related to the schedule of the next steps of the energy reform. In the first place, what he mentioned is that we will have by October the bylaws of the secondary laws. And so this will be the third stage. As I mentioned before, there are 4 stages or 4 steps to implement the energy reform in Mexico. The first one was the constitutional amendments that happened in December of last year. Then we had some weeks ago the issuing of the secondary legislation. By October, we will have most of the bylaws, both in the hydrocarbon and the electricity sector. And after that, we'll have the regulatory instruments. Now, talking specifically about clean energy certificates, President Peña announced that the guidelines, the general guidelines, will be also ready in October. Once we have those general guidelines that will be issued by the Secretary of Energy, by CENER, we will start working on the specific regulatory instruments. It's right now a little bit early to talk about the specifics because our regulation will have to be based on the guidelines. Now, let me just mention something that it's very important, because this is something that always arises with people that are related to the renewable sector. the clean energy certificates are part of what will be used to foster and to promote clean energies. But that will not be the only instrument. We are reviewing what we already have in place and that has been working in the past as the Bank of Energy, the Energy Bank, excuse me, or the specific postage stamps for renewable energy. So those kind of instruments will probably be a part of the menu of regulatory instruments we'll have in the future to continue promoting clean energy technologies. So all of this will have to be implemented. In theory, what we want to have is a basic market operating by mid next year. So all this regulation will have to, or most of this regulation will have to be in place before that.
So if you don't, if you'll permit me, there's a couple of follow-up questions on what you were talking about here. Let me just put them up really quickly. One has to do with who will purchase and the pricing of clean energy certificates, who will be required to purchase clean energy certificates, how will price be established. I don't know if there's anything else you can add to that from what you just said.
Yes, I can. What it's clear from what it's written in the law is that the ones that will be forced or that will have the obligation to purchase the certificates are the consumers, either as eligible users, or directly as if they're eligible users, or through their supplier if they are not eligible users. So the obligations will be placed on the demand side and not on the supply side.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Let's move a little bit to a question I think gets into some of what you began to talk about in terms of the new framework. This is a specific question. Is it planned to change the current wheeling charge tariff system, the suggestion here from a kilowatt hour to a kilometer-based system? Any comments on that, Francisco?
Yes, not in principle. Well, let me say this. We have two different wheeling schemes. One for conventional technologies, which is basically one that tries to promote a new generation whenever it is needed. So, for instance, the rates are based on the fact if you go with the flow or against the energy flow or the electricity flow. That kind of wheeling system will probably be replaced by a new one. We are initially discussing that we'll probably have something like a postage stamp wheeling charge, but it's too early to give the details. But that's our general idea, and we'll of course we'll have to have something ready by mid next year, so in order to have the market operating.
Thank you. There's a few questions here regarding SENACE, the independent system operator, that I'd like to, there's a few questions about the market. So let's start with a question specifically about SENACE, if you don't mind. I'm putting it up. Requirements for energy generators, to subscribe to SENACE. Could you talk a little bit about that? And then there's one or two other questions I want to put up with regard to the market and the new system.
Well, the specific requirements will be part of the regulation that we'll have to issue in the coming months. This is one of the very specific things that are described in the legislation. We'll have 9 months to set that to issue, for instance, the contract models for SENACE. SENACE will have 3 more months to sign those contracts. And also the other instrument that will be very important to describe those requirements are the market rules. And the market rules will have to will be issued early next year. The first draft will probably be ready by January or February. Again, as I mentioned before, this market rules draft will be subject to public consultation, and they will have to be ready before the market starts.
Excellent, thank you. Here's another fairly specific question that I think would be very interesting to get your thoughts on. How do you envision the Fondo de Servicio Universal Eléctrico working to finance projects in marginalized communities?
Well, I do not have a very specific idea on how this will work, because this is not under our responsibilities. This is something that will be under the responsibilities of the Ministry of Energy. But one thing that it's important to know about the Fondo de Servicio Universal Eléctrico is that will be funded by not only by the agents participating in the market, but it will also be funded, or could be funded also with the federal budget. And the other thing that it's important to say is that what we want to have is the use of renewable energies in some communities that would not allow for interconnection to the grid, because it would be very expensive.
Excellent, thank you. If you don't mind, Francisco, do you mind talking a little bit about something on the more the oil and gas side, and perhaps there's a question about Senegas in that side of the regulatory landscape. And the question is, the natural gas pipelines will become part of the Senegas purview. What about oil pipelines?
No, oil pipelines, Senegas will be strictly devoted to natural gas. It won't be devoted to other products, not to LPG, not to oil products. So the oil pipelines will continue to be owned by Pemex. And what I've heard, and this is something that it's up to them, is that they will be probably creating an affiliate company that will be in charge of that. The important thing for us is that those pipelines will have to be open access in the very beginning. It's going to be very important that we'll have new players, so the infrastructure we have in place will have to be shared with other users. And of course, we want new pipelines to be built as soon as possible. But in the meantime, what we will have is regulation that will allow the entrance to use those pipelines.
Excellent, thank you. Returning to CRE, there's a procedural question that I'd like to have you respond to, if you don't mind, Francisco. And the question is, will there be an established process for getting a ruling from CRE, or how fast can we expect CRE to act on all these situations? So a bit of thoughts on procedure, yeah.
Okay, as I mentioned before, some of the regulatory instruments that we'll have to issue have some specific times. So we are subject to those, to the timelines that were set in the legislation. Now, in terms of general instruments, basically, if it's a general instrument, we'll have to send our proposal to COFEMER, which is the regulatory watchdog that we have in Mexico. And COFEMER will have to publish the new regulation. That regulation will be open for a public consultation for a period of almost a month. It's 20 working days, which is like a month. And we'll receive the comments from that process, and we'll be able to react on those comments. And if we consider those comments are useful, we will review the regulation, and we will issue regulation based on that.
Excellent, thank you. And the comments, we began our discussion and question and answer period with some information on clean energy certificates and renewables. And Francisco, I have to say, I keep receiving more and more questions, so I'd like to go back to that if you don't mind. And there's a question about, let me put that up on the screen real quick. Would CFEs count as a supplier of these non-qualified users, domestic users, or is the public surface use excluded from this mandate? So if you could maybe fill in some of the blanks on clean energy certificates vis-a-vis CFE. Yeah,
well, no, as I mentioned before, the obligations will be placed on the demand side. And CFE will act as a supplier of regulated users in the very beginning. There could be more than CFE as suppliers of these regulated users. But in the very beginning, CFE will be the supplier of these regulated users. So as such, CFE will have the obligation to buy those clean energy certificates. Again, it is the demand that will be obligated to that, and CFE will represent the small users in the demand side.
Okay, thank you. Some questions about pricing in under the new arrangement. Are you going to consider the environmental cost in new electricity tariffs? How are you planning to manage politically the implementation of new prices of electricity?
Okay, let me start by saying that what kind of tariffs or what kind of rates we will have under the energy reform.
Okay.
We'll have rates for transmission and distribution, and of course, those rates will not be related to the clean energy mandates or to the environmental cost. Of course, the only thing that we'll be regulating is that the transmission lines and distribution lines meet all the environmental impact assessments requirements, and beyond that, we will regulate those costs to be efficient. So we will make sure that those costs are efficient. And the rest of the rates that we'll be setting are the rates for the small users. As I mentioned before, the eligible users will be not subject to regulation. Of course, they will have to be. They will have to pay for transmission and distribution, and that part of the sector will be regulated. But the price of energy for them will not be regulated. Now, for the small users, we'll be regulating the entire tariff, the entire rate. And in those cases, what we will be able to do is to, of course, include as part of that regulation the cost of obligations that they will have to meet the requirements for clean energy. Or the other thing that we'll be also doing is that if for instance, we are far away from the goal that we have set in the different laws in terms of the penetration of clean energies, it is very feasible that the Energy Ministry will auction some projects related to renewable energies. So the result of that auction will be considered as part of the electricity rate, and of course will allow that cost to be a pass-through to the users.
Excellent, thank you. We've got time for just a couple more questions, Francisco. I'm going to continue. There's one more question about relating to the market and some specific elements that somebody like addressed on the capacity market. What will be taken into account in the spot market or pricing or a separate market? I think you began to talk about this, but if you could, complement your earlier remarks with this question.
Well, it's a very interesting question, and to be honest, we do not have an answer to that yet. It is part of what we're discussing right now with the ministry, and fortunately for us, we are not in a condition where we are not desperate for capacity. We have enough capacity. The capacity, the reserve that we have in the system will allow us to think this very thoroughly. We want to have a market that works well, so we do not have a specific answer to this question yet. Okay,
that's a great answer. Thank you. Let me. There's a procedural question about what happens during the process in the interim. Will the CRE continue to issue permits, or will the processes be frozen until the new rules and new forms are released?
Well, no, we will continue to issue permits, but the only permits that will be allowed to issue are those permits related to the new model. Now, having said that, we have something like hundreds of permit applications that we receive in the next month. So we will keep working with those permit applications that we received in the past months and days, and those permits, as it is written in the law, will be allowed to operate either under the previous scheme or under the new scheme. They will decide. They will not be able to operate at the same time in both schemes, in both models, but it's going to be their their decision on how they want, on if they want to operate under the previous or the new model.
Excellent. Thank you for clarifying that. If you don't mind, I'd like to end with a couple of questions on the gas side. There's a question here, another question about Senegas. How will pipeline capacity be made available through Senegas, and what will the role of Pemex gas marketing be?
Okay, in the first place, Senegas what will respect is what we call acquire rights of the existing users, and those the capacity of existing users will be given to them, and the remaining capacity will be bid. Pemex Gas will not be playing a role here, since the capacity right does not belong to Pemex Gas Marketing. It belongs to the final user. Of course, Pemex Gas Marketing will be allowed to operate as a marketer. They will be allowed to go with the end users and offer them the service of bundling different services. But the acquired right belongs to the end users, not to Pemex Gas Marketing. Pemex, as a refiner or as a user of gas in the E&P sector, is a final user. But even Pemex will be free to choose a different marketer if they decide to.
Excellent. Thank you for clarifying that. And there's one other question, if you would. We'll end with this question. It's 1 o'clock here in San Diego, 3 o'clock in Mexico, and Francisco's had an extremely busy day, so I don't want to keep you too long. How will natural gas pricing work under the new regulatory structure? Will prices continue to be regulated by the government CRE? I think you've talked a little bit about this in your presentation, but if you don't mind filling in the blanks as your last question here.
Yes. Well, as in the past, we will not be regulating the price of natural gas that it's imported by other entities different to Pemex. In the very beginning, we'll be regulating for a transitory period. We'll be regulating the price of gas for Pemex. But as soon as we see that there are more entrants, we will get rid of that regulation. We do not want regulation to be a barrier of entry to new players. Of course, again, let me just insist, regulation of price will only be applied to Pemex in the very beginning, not to the other players.
Okay. Well, Francisco, this has been wonderful. I want to put up, somebody posted a question, but it's really not a question. It's a very nice comment. So I want to put that up for everyone to see. And they say CRE has done an extraordinary job in this exciting new energy regime in Mexico. And you know, we couldn't agree more here at the Institute of the Americas. And so we greatly appreciate your time today. I know you've got a million things going on, but helping us better understand particularly the CRE's role, but the new regulatory environment in Mexico under the reforms. Thank you so much, Francisco, and thanks everyone for joining us online. Apologies for the mic problem there at the beginning of the Q&A, but thanks again, Francisco, for your time. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Jeremy, and thanks to the Institute of the Americas.
Thank you, everybody, and Alexis will be in touch with the recording and PDF copy of the presentation that Francisco delivered today on the webinar. We hope to see you again soon, either here online, but hopefully in person. August 26th, next week, we'll be in Lima for a Peru Energy Roundtable talking about natural gas and what Camisea has meant. September 9th in Colombia for lots of different things, but specifically how community engagement can be enhanced. October 1st, Washington, D.C., more discussion of geopolitics of natural gas. And then December 3rd, and we hope Francisco will be with us for this one, we'll be convening our annual Mexico Energy Roundtable. Thank you. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Appreciate your time online.